Hello, and welcome to Financials Podcast Future Rich. I am your host, Barbara Ginty, and I'm also a CFP, which is a certified financial planner. And I am here today to wrap up our season. We are going to have one more bonus episode, and I will give you a little sneak peek. We are bringing on some very exciting guests for our last episode. And so I'm going to be reading this book, and then our next episode, I'm going to be speaking with Heather and Doug Bonaparte with their new book, Money Together, which I think will be super interesting to talk about how to manage finances together. We've definitely talked about that on the show, and I'm always interested because there's no right or wrong way, in my opinion. So I'm very interested to hear what Heather and Doug have to say and give you a review of the book. So that will be our last episode. That will air next week. And then we are going to go into our winter break. And we will be off for December, January, and then we'll be back, fingers crossed, with February. As you know, I'm having a baby in February, so our plan is to get everything recorded in advance so that we can start next season at the end of February. So we'll be off for, our 8 to 10 week break, and then we'll announce when we're coming back with new episodes. We are going to be recording, and we're going to be putting an Instagram out about this, but we are going to be recording in December and January. I am specifically looking for women who are in either their 50s or 60s who are interested in planning out their retirement. So if you have any questions about specifically with retirement and Social Security analysis, retirement income strategy, pension selection, and those sort of questions, I would love to have you on the show. But we're looking for women in their 50s and their 60s who want to do a deeper dive into retirement planning. We'll be recording those. Once again, it's anonymous and it is remote. So it's very easy to participate. So if you have some questions and you want to spend an hour with me, an hour to an hour and a half, going over your questions pertaining to retirement, we would love to have you. We are opening up 10 slots for this specific target of retirement, and we'll be recording those in December and in January. And I think most of you know this, but probably better just to say it. It will be completely anonymous and remote. And generally, in order to work with my practice in my day-to-day, my day job, not the podcast, we require a minimum of $1 million investable to be a client. And oftentimes we have a wait list because we try to keep our practice small so that we don't get overwhelmed with clients. And so this is a great opportunity if you don't have what our minimum is, which is $1 million. A lot of CFPs and financial practices have minimums in order to work with them. Minimums can range anywhere from $250,000 upwards of $3 million in order to work with specific firms, depending on what you're looking for. And so coming on the podcast is a free hour with me, between an hour and a half, where we can go through your questions and hopefully resolve some of your questions, give you some education. And so you don't have to make or meet any of those minimums. There's no contract. It's purely just an hour to an hour and a half remotely with me to go over your questions, which is very different than, if you were looking for someone to work with in the day-to-day. Most practices, planning practices, do have those minimums. Mine specifically is $1 million, but other practices range between $250,000 as a starting investment amount, all the way up to $3 million. And other practices work differently, as we've discussed. Like they might have a minimum of the billable. Ours is an asset minimum, but other firms might say we need to, to work with us, our minimum billable for annual is $10,000 or $15,000 to, commit to work with you. So I just wanted to throw that out there. If you are a female in your 50s or 60s and you have specific questions regarding retirement, we have 10 slots available in December and January for an anonymous remote recording to go over those questions. And then we'll air those episodes for our next season. And so the best way to apply to be on the show is on our website, which is www.futurerichpodcast.com. Or you could also send us, if you have any questions or concerns, you can send us a message on our website, or you can find us on Instagram, and that is Future Rich Podcast. So to wrap up kind of the conversation we were having last week, I said that if anyone was interested, I'd be happy to share what the cost was for the second half. of IVF. I was fortunate, and I think that anyone who is leaning towards egg freezing, I'm really happy that I did it, and I'm really happy I did it, when I did it back in my 30s, so that um, now being the advanced age of 41, I had frozen eggs from when I was 34, and that was really helpful for me. I'm going to share a video on our Instagram today of another very successful businesswoman who shared her story of IVF, and they ended up having to use donor eggs from what she said on her story. And so I feel really fortunate that I had frozen eggs at 34. Although all my numbers really looked good, if we had wanted to go through and do a live round, we ended up being very successful with the frozen eggs, turning those into embryos. We got very lucky. And so, also because I did it so long ago, it was cheaper. And then the second half, so that you could see, I was around with everything with genetic testing, on freezing, creation of embryos, and different tests we had to have done. We spent around 12,000 so far this year. I won't say who, but one of us needed a surgery. So we spent around another 4,500 out of pocket. For those of you who know, sometimes it is cheaper to pay cash than use insurance. So we did not run that surgery through our insurance because it would have cost, this is crazy, but it would have cost more money to have the surgery through insurance, because basically what our insurance does is they mark up the price so much higher when you put it through insurance. And so then the amount that we owe after the insurance mandates that the surgery is 3x the actual price ends up being more than cash pay. So this has worked really, really well for me. I am not a health insurance expert, but what we've done is we found out what the insurance with the billing code is going to charge, which usually is way more money than what the cost is. And then we find out from the provider if we cash pay, so the credit card pay, no one actually takes cash, but cash pay in advance of services. We were able, with all of the providers that we use, not IVF, but like for surgery, and like different other testing, we were able to get that reduced by 40% by paying in advance of service with a one-time payment. So we ran the numbers. Actually, my husband ran the numbers because I was busy at work, but he found out what it was going to cost if we put it through insurance, which was like $2,000 more. So we decided to cash pay and pay for that in advance. Little trick with insurance, it doesn't always work. You really have to understand your own insurance plan. They're all very different. But that's something that we're probably also going to do. I'm hoping we put having the baby through insurance, because we've been putting everything through insurance for this cycle so that we meet our deductible. We have a high deductible plan, so it's quite high for a family out of pocket. And so we'll ideally meet that and then not have a massive bill. But I also wouldn't be surprised if we did. So we'll probably do a little more research about that after we finish the podcast season and see if there's anything we should be cash paying for that would be cheaper. A little tip there. But the IVF itself, we had no coverage whatsoever. So everything was paid out of pocket. And those expenses ran around 12,000 for the second half, because I already had the eggs frozen. And then we spent another 4,500 on a surgery that was not covered. And we decided to cash pay because it was cheaper than using insurance. So a very expensive endeavor. My pricing probably will come in lower than other people's pricing because I did do the egg freezing 6 years ago. And so pricing has gone up, just like everything else has gone up. So ballpark, depending on where you go and how many drugs you have and whether or not it works the first time, it is a very expensive endeavor. And so you've seen people come on the show. It is absolutely something you can plan for and prioritize, which is why I love financial planning, because it's all about maximizing the money that you have coming in and making sure how you're spending your money serves your goals and your needs. And if one of your goals is to have a family, and using IVF or egg freezing is a priority of yours, it's absolutely something that you can work towards saving for and make it financially feasible. Obviously, the earlier, the sooner you do it, the better, because you freeze eggs at 34, it's better than freezing eggs at 41 per medical research, but I'm not a doctor, so you can do your own. I will repost when we put this episode out, one of the doctors I follow on Instagram, and I think she puts out really great content about IVF. And she works at RMA, which is a well-known clinic. So that is a follow-up to last week's episode. So hopefully that gives anyone who's thinking about egg freezing or IVF some numbers around it, but it is incredibly expensive. So all in, we ended up spending, or I ended up spending because I did the egg freezing by myself, around 22,000, not including the surgery. So that bumps us up to like 26,000. The nice thing is I spread this out over 6 years, so it wasn't all in one year. And oftentimes people who are doing this have it all in one year. So there's a huge expense. More, as I think we said last week, more and more companies are offering this as a benefit. So it's something worth investigating if you have fertility coverage, what you have, and if there are caps, right? Because sometimes what they say is you could do IVF, but we have a limit on what we're going to contribute towards that. And so if you reach the cap, then you then have to pay out of pocket. So it's really important always to understand your benefits. And these are things that I think I've said before with the podcast. If you are going to be switching jobs, you really want to evaluate what benefits you currently have and what benefits you'll have at the next job. And are you giving up some not obvious financial benefit, right? Because you have IVF coverage at this company and that's something you're interested in. That could be worth $25,000 to you or more, depending if they cover one cycle or two cycles, right? And this company doesn't offer it and they're going to pay you $10,000 more. If you wanted that fertility coverage, it's actually worth more than the $10,000 annual increase if you go ahead and use it. So those are things important to look at when you're looking at your job and your career. And then if you're like myself and self-employed, you can still do it. You just have to plan and probably plan in advance to make sure that you have the funds necessary. So I hope by sharing our story of the egg freezing and IVF, that was helpful because I feel like amongst talking to my friend group, it is pretty commonplace and I don't think it often gets talked about. And also what's getting spent. Everyone's numbers, as I said, are so different because everyone's bodies are different and the clinics are different and how many drugs you need and what drugs you have or you recommend it to take are all very different. So the pricing varies, but we can just say generally it's very expensive if you're paying out of pocket. So hopefully sharing our story, and I will say that I think we got very lucky that I had done this really early and that we were very successful with the embryo creation. And so we got very, very, very lucky. So our costs were minimal compared to some stories you see and what some people spend, but it is something to plan for. And hopefully by sharing, you have some real numbers to use on what it costs. And then so for next week, you should absolutely tune in. I'm really excited to have Heather and Doug on the show. And as always, we produce the show for women. It's produced by myself. Well, actually, I'm just the host. I don't produce anything. Amy and Alex do all the production and all the work. Amy is our rock star editor, and she edits everything and publishes everything. And so I'm very grateful for our amazing team, three of us. So it's produced by women for women, and our mission is to help improve financial education amongst women because the more you understand your own finances and you take control of your finances, you have control over your life. So if the show has helped you in any way, which is absolutely our goal, we would love if you could share this podcast with a friend or a sibling or a colleague. And if you enjoy it, we would super appreciate you rating and reviewing the show. Rating and reviewing and sharing with just one person helps us more than you'll ever know. Our goal is to continue to grow and spread the education and help improve other females' financial situations. So the more people that know about our show, the better. And so we appreciate all of our lovely listeners, and we hope you have a absolutely wonderful holiday season. And we will be back next year in 2026 with an entirely new season. But don't forget to tune in next week so we can hear Heather and Doug talk about money together. Time for our disclaimer. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance references are historical and do not guarantee future results. Make sure that you consult with your own legal, tax, and/or financial advisor before making any decisions.